Greetings to the 24.2 thousand grimdark enjoyers of my channel, and a friendly hello to the nearly 77% who haven't subscribed. Initially I had in mind for this week's video to be on something topical, like the new guard stuff. Just imagine the video thumbnail that reads, "What I would like to see from the new Imperial Guard Codex." But I don't exactly know if that type of video is something you guys would be interested in. If that style of commentary, the thoughts on whatever is topical style of commentary, is something you like or would like, feel free to let me know in the comments. That said, based on the feedback from last week's video, it does seem this format does resonate. And so I thought I'd give it another go, and share something else. But it isn't anything about the Guard Codex or the Krieg release. It's about something bigger, something I've been thinking about for a while. A few months back I made a video claiming that 10th edition 40k has lost its soul. If I recall correctly, the video was titled "No Chapter Masters equals No Soul." I'll toss up a link in the drop-down card. This video is sort of a sequel to that one, but in addition to building on that topic of just how 40k has lost its soul, I'll also be exploring how to recover the soul of Warhammer 40k, or at least how I think Games Workshop could recover the soul of 40k. So I'm gonna try and work this out as I go. As for where to start, something about the tabletop space feels sort of, how do I put it, off? Shallow? Disconnected maybe? What I'm referring to is separate from the lack of thematic flourishing rules like fielding chapter masters in standard matched play, and separate from the failure of preserving legacy units within the Legends unit type category. We have more releases than ever before, more big figures turning up to the table than ever before, and yet, it feels hollow. And after giving this much thought, I have concluded this is largely because of Games Workshop's bias in serving the competitive gaming scene. Now I'll preempt the claim by saying this is an indirect consequence, not a direct one, because I think there is room for both spaces. As for why I've concluded that GW's competitive focus is sapping the soul of 40k, well, we can start by building off of the "No Chapter Masters equals No Soul" claim and example in the previous video. That if the goal is to create a finely balanced game system, which essentially sees every army's rule set fall into a structure of 1 army rule, 1 detachment rule, 4 enhancements, and 6 stratagems, you're naturally going to have to cut out thematic rules which don't nicely fit into that box. Beyond that, we can consider how it feels that the competitive view just seems to be how most things are framed within. It feels like everything is serving those ends. When it comes to a new product release cycle, which we can look to the new Krieg stuff as an example, GW makes their usually spiffy reveal showcase videos, which I have zero problem with, by the way. It makes sense to me to make a video aiming to make the models look as good as possible. But from there, it feels as if the entire conversation becomes, "Whoa, look how potent these new units are. Did you see the new jank the guard get? That detachment has some serious tech." And while I am poking fun at the normie online reactions to Warhammer community posts, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that there is a lack of significance on why the release is impactful to the setting. To quote the great Bilbo Baggins, it feels thin, sort of stretched, like butter scraped over too much bread. And we could also look to something we're all too familiar with, those meta win rate charts that the Warhammer community at large are so fond of. The charts which demonstrate the gathering of win rate data from competitive events to drive rule rebalancing, all in an effort to achieve a chart that reflects a perfectly balanced competitive landscape. Rule rebalancing which not only hits the power gaming outliers at the top tables, but clips your friendly neighborhood wargamer using a softball detachment as well. That is to say, it's an undeniable marker of GW's default framing, their lens of attention to the competitive space, which in this case, incidentally burns the casual narrative or thematic wargamers. You know, your beer and pretzels types. And lest we forget the horrendous roadmaps from last year, where Games Workshop framed the lull in releases not as the Imperium is spread thin by Leviathan's invasion and the Silent King awakening the Necrons in numbers unseen, Elsewhere an ancient evil stirs, alluding to that chaos surprise, i.e. Fulgrim, but rather as, and I quote, "It's time to take a breath, to watch the balance, and enjoy the World Championships of Warhammer." Which to me speaks volumes. But reflecting on it all, it seems as though Games Workshop isn't interested in elevating how the backdrop of the galaxy evolves and shifts. Their lens with regards to product releases is purely aiming at facilitating the competitive space, which in a setting as rich as this, it is, dare I say, a tragedy to rival that of the Drop Site Massacre. This is why every edition has some new great threat, the worst we have ever seen plaguing the Imperium. 8th edition it was the Death Guard, 9th edition was Necrons, and in 10th edition we have Tyranids. 11th, Orcs, probably. It's a great idea, but it amounts to a launch box at the start of the edition to be promptly glossed over. No slower than Warhammer community shifting their post from last week's pre-order, because now we need to focus on this week's pre-order. Where is my disgust meme? It's why we had 2 Primarchs return to the setting only for them to do nothing. They had a fight at the end of a campaign series, which was in my opinion a fairly lackluster campaign, only to go on and do nothing. These Primarchs, hell, any Primarchs returning is a huge deal. It's a carrot that the IP has been dangling for decades. And the Lion returns with a model I admittedly think is mostly awesome. Only to do nothing. No meaningful reunion with the Dark Angels, no significant interaction with Gilliman. Instead, Johnson just shows up, slaps Angron, and fucks off like he's Batman, absent of any substantive, meaningful payoff for the First Legion. And that's why things feel so hollow. It's as though the IP is wearing the lore like a skin suit. Primarchs are returning. The Silent King has returned. The Leagues of Votann have stepped forward. Leviathan is blotting out the stars. Lost Phoenix Lords are returning. Demon Fulgrim is returning. Everything is happening, yet nothing happens. This video was brought to you by me, so don't forget to like and subscribe. But if you prefer content that is more positive and less critical, you may enjoy my recent thematic battle report. Also, I've started up a podcast of sorts with Outer Circle and Northern Exile. Each of us take turns hosting the videos, but the playlist is over on Outer Circle's channel. So if you need some grimdark therapy, you can find the link for that playlist, as well as the link to the battle report previously mentioned in the description of this video. In summary, it seems to me the reason why 40k's tabletop space is feeling rather hollow is twofold. Firstly, the tabletop space feels too focused on competitive organized play, resulting in the narrative being relegated to just background lip service. And the other part being what I identified in the previous video, that flavorful and thematically rich rules, your chaos boons, demonic summoning, custom chapter masters, etc., have been sacrificed on the altar for the sake of creating a finely balanced game system. And after saying it out loud, it does paint a dour picture. But as for what I would suggest as the means to fixing the problem, as per the title of the video, I think Games Workshop needs to start framing their releases through a narrative lens in addition to the competitive focus we have. Yes, as I alluded to earlier, I think there is room for both. This would require a kind of framework, and despite my issues with its current iteration, I think the Crusade platform is apt for the task. Now personally, Crusade has too much bookkeeping for my liking. In fact, I would alter quite a few of its systems and design it so that your playgroup can optionally opt into varying layers of rule density. But I don't want to turn this video into a how I would streamline or mod Crusade video. But stick with me, because honestly, I find this to be a rather fun premise. So if you'll indulge me, I'll walk you through it and you can tell me what you think. And at the very least, we can end on a more positive theoretical rather than a dour practical. For starters, at the onset of an edition, there should be a Crusade Compendium. This would be an epic tome, which would contain the necessary bespoke progression systems for all, I repeat, all of the currently available armies. This is because starting a Crusade campaign at the start of an edition is a fun idea, but it's a titanically stupid idea to restrict bespoke Crusade rules for armies in their relevant codices. As the Codex business model means, some armies will have to wait years before they can participate in that Crusade campaign. Yes, technically you could participate with the basic layer of generic rules, but it's not narratively satisfying and it makes me wonder, why am I even playing Crusade? The details of this problem have been made ad nauseum from the competitive side of the aisle. But from a narrative point of view, I think a case can be made that it's actually worse. Because at least competitive players get point adjustments and balanced data slates to mediate their performance outcomes relative to their opposition, which may or may not have more recent product and rules support. But I digress. The point is, you have your Crusade Compendium at the edition's start, which features all of the flavorful progression paths and unit interactions that have been effectively cut away from the matched play space. Things like elevating your Chaos Lord to a Demon Prince, and tools to create your chapter command. We can extend this further. Why not bring back the kind of rules-writing philosophy that made the hobby element of our hobby so enriching? I'm thinking of those flavorful Tyranid adaptive mutations. Include the means to facilitate top-dog leader characters being able to access their armory and use whatever war gear they desire. I mean, if matched play really is for current product only, then I don't see any better place for the options of old or new than the narrative framework. Or how about Orc looted vehicles, which actually used the looted vehicles profile with Orky ballistic skill? You could even incorporate it into the narrative framework. Like if an Orc player wanted to loot a Land Raider, they would have to face off against one and destroy it. How's that for some very satisfying local playgroup interaction? And since we're creating a peak narrative framework here, following up on the topic of last week's video, this compendium would be an ideal place to house Legends units, but actually include all Legacy units. Beyond that initial compendium, what keeps things dynamic should be a seasonal publication. And while yes, Crusade has been given supplemental support through both 9th and 10th edition, those supplements have largely been tied to their matched play counterpart for that period of time, which is most clear in 10th edition. Instead, these season supplements should be tied to the big tentpole product releases of the edition. Without getting too into the weeds, there should be rules that provide some thematic flavor relevant to the featured encounter, whether it's a mission pack, a set of linked missions, or mission modifiers. And it should include necessary systems for each army to give them some interaction and reward tied to the theme of that theater of war. So if Leviathan invading is the big tentpole event for the edition's start, that first seasonal narrative pack should set rules in place to fight on invasion warfronts, and provide thematic battle takeaways when battling against, or in playing as the Tyranids. In essence, you want your seasonal packs to incentivize the army, or armies, in the spotlight. Now, 10th edition's Crusade supplement essentially did this, but really only serves from the Imperium's point of view, and I don't particularly like the design philosophy of the current Crusade system either, so we'll leave it at that. And so, after that season is done, you'd begin building up to your next major releases of the edition. So if we were to look at 9th edition as an example, you'd start out with a Necrons-focused Season 1, which, I don't know, maybe you call it something like Indomitus, which could culminate in a thematic spotlight encounter with the Silent King. Then your next season would culminate with the Orcs, perhaps focusing on Mozrog helming a Savage Wa. After that, you'd build up to Be'lakor, and maybe to close out you'd start with a Votann debut, which sees Angron and the Lion battle as its climax. I may have missed a big release or two, but you get the idea. You position Crusade, the vehicle being used for narrative framing, to build up to these major product releases, whether they be some setting-defining epic conflict like the Lion vs. Angron, or a new range release like the Leagues of Votann entering the fray. When I think about it, you essentially want people looking back on these landmarks and saying, remember that epic campaign which built up to the Silent King or the Lion's Return? For players to be able to take the Crusade army they are playing at the time and contribute to the present seasonal major conflict. Much in the same way, narrative swings, new weapons, enemies, and missions and warfronts are framed within Helldivers 2. Hell, if GW was really on their P's and Q's, they would tie in their Warhammer Plus content, and maybe even Black Library novels, to this ever-evolving tapestry. Like, imagine this. Instead of releasing a teaser trailer for content aimed to further hype up the Cadians, why not produce some content aimed at hyping up Krieg if you have a Krieg release on the horizon? Better yet, what if that bit of content spoke to the ongoing campaign of the present season? The campaign which you and your buds are currently engaging in as well. That, to me, is pretty compelling as a narrative play paradigm. That's pretty much the gist of it. I can't help but feel a paradigm which couches major releases prominently within a narrative framing which the player base gets to participate in to be far more intriguing and much more wholesome for the hobby on the whole. And come to think of it, if memory serves, that is what GW did with Vigilus and Abaddon's release. Shadowspear gave a product release and range refresh for Marines and Chaos Space Marines, and Vigilus itself served as a backdrop for new sculpts for both Calgar and Abaddon. Oh, and of course, how could we forget the much-beloved Harkin World Claimer legend? But when you realize how much work probably went into making those campaign books, accounting for nearly every army's inclusion in Vigilus, all the work that would go into working out all the lore, to plan all the releases, it's probably easier to not do all or any of that, and just simply watch the balance and enjoy the World Championships of Warhammer. Here's a bonus bit which was cut from the script, but I felt it was a waste to not use it. So here it is for your enjoyment. With all that laid out, the idea of narratively framing releases so they are built up in a satisfying way which incorporates the players is, I believe, an agreeable enough concept. But I would be remiss not to mention that you still need to have highly anticipated, long sought after characters, like the Lion, given meaningful payoffs. Because if you don't, it will still feel shallow. Like, sorry, the return to Primarch payoff can't just be that now I can buy the model. That is so stupid. The lore is too deep and the weight is too anticipated. Let's just say I hope Fulgrim gets treated more like Mortarion than like Angron. The tastefulness of the battle outcomes against their respective loyalist brothers aside, at least Mortarion was given insight to his character and his standing in the world in the Dark Imperium series. Angron gets a little bit of a pass since he's more of a force of nature since becoming a giant red rage monster. But when you think about it, there is some interesting stuff you could dare with his integration with the Legion. But anyways, with regards to the Lion, and the Dark Angels fans, they deserve much more. And perhaps that is an avenue for some of that Warhammer Plus content, to use your exclusive content platform, to meaningfully explore character-based interactions that flesh out the setting, to do something interesting with your big players and key figures. Well, if GW has the stones for it, that is. That might be worth subscribing for. Well, that's a wrap on this Thoughts on Recovering the Soul of 40k. If you enjoyed this video, there are buttons for liking, sharing, and subscribing. And as always, a special thanks to Julius Maximus, as well as my other generous patrons and channel members. Channel members and patrons get early access to videos. Just a little something for those who help keep the dream alive. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch ya in the next one.